Hi everyone. Welcome to our flipped classroom where I give the recording, which is our instruction, and then we talk about it in class the next time. So anyway, what you should have out right now is your style guide, either printed or in front of you on your computer. If you don't, go ahead and get that set up and then come back. Okay. So what you need to know is that the Odyssey is an epic poem composed by Homer sometime between 750 and 700 BCE. The poem was told orally to an audience comprised mostly of men at festivals or on other social occasions. What I want to highlight here is that it was an epic poem, so it's not a novel or a play. It's actually poetry, translated from the Greek, and that it was told orally. It was not written down. So Homer had to use certain devices to keep his audience informed and entertained, and we'll talk about those shortly. Okay, so how do you know you're reading an epic poem? An epic poem is a long narrative poem, narrative meaning it tells a story, describing the adventures and achievements of a hero. So Odysseus is the hero in this story, and he is one of the earliest recorded heroes ever, which is why we study the Odyssey. And you'll notice for your homework that you'll be listening to a video about the characteristics of an epic hero and then writing that down. Okay, anyway, here are the elements of an epic poem. They include a hero, usually of historical or legendary significance, begins in media res in the middle of things. So when the Odyssey begins, it's not told in chronological order. So book one starts with Odysseus' son Telemachus going out to find him, and Odysseus has been stuck on Calypso's island for 7 years, so again, starts in the middle of things. Okay, next there's an invocation or a prayer to a muse. In this case, for book one starts out with the words or the line, "Sing to me of the man Muse, the man of twists and turns." So Homer was invoking the muse Calliope, who was the muse of epic poetry. So he was appealing to her for divine inspiration as he began his long poem. Okay, so there were 9 muses. All of them were Zeus's daughters. Zeus had a lot of kids. They were goddesses of the fine arts who provided creative inspiration. And like I said, Calliope was the goddess of epic poetry. Okay, so I put a star here. You should star your document if possible next to themes. So another element is the early introduction of themes. And themes for the Odyssey include the following: home, family, fate, heroism, identity, pride, death, hospitality, loyalty, fame, revenge, and temptation. So as you're annotating, you are going to be looking for these themes. Okay. Another element is a vast setting covering nations of the world. So you will see that what we're reading is Odysseus' journey, where he and his men go back and forth and cover many miles. All right, the next element is intervention of the gods. You will notice, I think book 1 opens with Zeus. Well, Athena is talking to Zeus about how it's time to get Odysseus off the island. So that's an intervention. Poseidon intervenes, we will see, because he can't stand Odysseus, and we'll see why. Hermes also jumps in. So the gods are very involved in mortal affairs. Okay, star next to epithet, because that's another thing we're going to be annotating for. An epithet is a word or phrase repeated in connection with a person or thing, so often that it almost becomes a part of their name. So for examples like wily Odysseus or the giant killer Hermes. And the reason for this is that epithets help the reader to identify characters because, like I said, this was an oral telling, and so Homer would often repeat Wily Odysseus, a giant killer Hermes, just to get it stuck in the. I said the readers. It should be the listeners' minds. Okay, another thing starred is stock phrases. These are phrases repeated throughout the poem to make it retelling easier for the poet. So, for example, when young Dawn with her rose red fingers shone once more, we're going to see that over and over again. It's so that the poet, when he was telling the story did not have to repeat the same lines over and over. Did not have to. Everything was not original. He could repeat the lines, same lines over to give himself a break. So that's what a stock phrase is used for. Okay. There were long epic speeches. There were catalogs or lists of things. There was genealogy. That's the history of who is related to whom. So if it says like Laertes, father of Odysseus, that's genealogy, and you're going to annotate for those things. And then Homeric similes, which we may not see for a while, was an elaborate comparison using like or as. That extended through a number of lines. So just basically a very long simile. Okay, of course there's epic battles, and then there's going to be a descent into Hades, into the underworld. Okay. So when you're annotating the Odyssey, you will be annotating specifically for these things. So put a T for themes, an E for epithets, SP for stock phrases, G for genealogy, and HS for Homeric similes.
Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This part of the style study, but because we talked about it in the background presentation, or the PowerPoint. But Homer sang his poems. He was blind. He composed two epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, both based on the Trojan War. That people think really happened.
Okay, so Iliad is the last year of the Trojan War, and then the Odyssey is Odysseus' 10-year journey home. And then this number 5, what's the story of the Trojan War? Again, we talked about that in the background PowerPoint.
So for this document, we're only looking at the bottom half of the map, the journey of Odysseus. And I guess what's important to point out is that book 9, which is where we are going to be starting, it starts here at number 15, where Odysseus is in Phaeacia. So what's happened is Athena told Calypso to let Odysseus go, and Calypso did. So he got to leave her island, and I don't know, he was on a raft. Anyway, he got caught up in some sort of storm and ended up in Phaeacia, which is another island. And the Phaeacian people asked him to tell who he is, where he came from. And so that's what Odysseus does. So book 9 starts here in Phaeacia, but it then becomes a flashback starting here at number 1 at Troy, right here. So because remember, chronologically, book 9 would come first. That was where the Trojan War ended, and Odysseus left Troy and started sailing for home and ended up in many places. So that's why the little note on the left says book 9 starts at 15 and then becomes a flashback starting at number 1. So he's telling the story to the Phaeacian people of his journey starting home from Troy. hope that makes sense. I wanted to add that you should have this map handy. If not printed, then certainly on your screen while you're reading, or while you're reading and while you're listening to the recordings, as well as the style study that we just went over. And then there's one more document that we're about to take a look at that I also want you to print out and have handy whenever you're reading the Odyssey. So here it is. So the third sheet I want you to have is this flashback sheet. I want you to have this handy when you're listening to the recordings or reading on your own, because it just helps keep track of where we are in the story, what's happening. So, for example, right now, as we are beginning Book 9, Odysseus is here in Phaeacia. However, he is going to begin his tale right here. This is what he's going to tell the Phaeacians about. Because as he left Troy, so from Troy, he went here. First stop was the Cicones on Ismarus. And next was the Lotus Eaters, and then finally Polyphemus. Okay, so that's what we are going to be seeing in Book 9. Notice, so he's got a lot more to go, basically, and we're just at the beginning. So now, if you will, go ahead, take out your Odyssey books, open to page 211, get a pen or pencil ready, and we will read and annotate together. I would do this with you if we were together in class. So if it seems very boring and tedious, I apologize. I just can't think of a better way to do it. If you guys have any ideas, let me know. Okay, see you soon. So this is the page you want to be on, page 211. I am sorry my copy is so written up and messy looking. I've taught this for a few years now, and I always add to it, but I'll highlight things so that you can see them, as we go on. But so Book 9, in the one-eyed giant's cave. All right, so Odysseus, the great teller of tales. So here's your first annotation. Going to underline the great teller of tales and put an E for epithet, because it's describing Odysseus. It's kind of like a long adjective is what an epithet is. So he launched out on his story. Alcinous, and Alcinous was the king of the Phaeacians. Alcinous, majesty, shining among your island people. What a fine thing it is to listen to such a bard as we have here. The man sings like a god, the crown of life, I'd say. So let me pause here for a minute, because we can also annotate for regular similes, other literary devices. So that was a simile, the crown of life. You might not pick up, I put M, it's a metaphor. The crown of life, I'd say. There's nothing better than when deep joy holds sway throughout the realm, and banqueters up and down the palace sit in ranks, enthralled to hear the bard. The bard, guys, is the poet, the person telling the stories, the poems. So that's why we call Homer a bard, because he didn't write down the stories, he sang them. So to hear the bard, and before them all the tables heaped with bread and meats, and drawing wine from a mixing bowl, the steward makes his rounds and keeps the wine cups flowing. This, to my mind, is the best that life can offer. So basically, they've just had a really nice dinner, and he's kind of thanking Alcinous for that. He says, but now you're set on probing the bitter pains I've borne. So I'm to weep and grieve, it seems, still more. Well then, what shall I go through first? Next page. What shall I say for last? What pains the gods have given me my share. Now, let me begin by telling you my name. So you may know it well, and I, in times to come, if I can escape the fatal day, will be your host, your sworn friend, though my home is far from here. And let me just pause. This is interesting. So when Odysseus arrived, before they even ask him his name, they give him food and drink and, make him comfortable. That was the Greek value of hospitality being demonstrated. So when a stranger showed up, you didn't even ask them anything about themselves. You fed them and took care of them, and then asked them their story. So that's what's happening here. So he says, I am Odysseus, son of Laertes. Okay, so you're going to underline that, put a G for genealogy, because he's talking about who he's related to. Known to the world for every kind of craft. My fame has reached the skies. Okay, well, fame, and that is the theme of fame. Okay, sunny Ithaca is my home. Atop her stands our sea mark, Mount Neriton's leafy ridges shimmering in the wind. Around her, a ring of islands circles side by side. Dulichian, Same, wooded Zassinus too. I apologize for my pronunciation, guys. But mine lies low and away, the farthest out to sea, rearing into the western dusk, while the others face the east and breaking day. Mine is a rugged land, but good for raising sons, and I myself, I know no sweeter sight on earth than a man's own native country. Okay, so here you're going to go and bracket that and put theme equals home. Okay, another one of the themes that appears frequently in the Odyssey. Okay, true enough, Calypso, the lustrous goddess. So a lot of times when I meet a new character, I just circle them. Okay, and lustrous is an epithet describing her. The lustrous goddess tried to hold me back, deep in her arching caverns, craving me for a husband. So did Circe, another character, holding me just as warmly in her halls, the bewitching queen of Aea, keen to have me too. But they never won the heart inside me, never. So nothing is as sweet as a man's own country, his own parents, even though he's settled down in some luxurious house, off in a foreign land and far from those who bore him. Okay, so it doesn't say it, but yeah, this is the theme of home. And what Odysseus is saying here is that even though he was held captive by these goddesses and had very nice, luxurious accommodations, he always wanted to get home. Okay, so he says, no more, come, let me tell you about the voyage fraught with hardship Zeus inflicted on me, homeward bound from Troy. So he says, the wind drove me out of Ilium. Ilium is another name for Troy. On to Ismarus, the Sacones' stronghold. Okay, so if you have your map, like I asked you to have, you will notice that number 1 is Troy, number 2 is Ismarus, and in parentheses it says the Sacones. Those were the people in Ismarus. So that's where Odysseus headed after Troy, and the reason he went there is because the Sacones, I'll circle them because they were kind of new characters, they were allies of Troy, and so he wanted to kind of beat them up for being friends with the Trojans. So he went there. He says, there I sacked the city, killed the men, but as for the wives and plunder, that rich haul we dragged away from the place. We shared it round, so no one, not on my account, would go deprived of his fair share of spoils. So, whoops, I'm not sure what happened there, but okay. So you're going to underline, we shared it round, so no one, not on my account, would go deprived of his fair share of spoils, and put SP for stock phrase. We are going to see that again on page 228. So stock phrases were these long repeated phrases that the poet used to, like I said, give himself a little break in the telling of the story. Now, the only reason I know that this is on page 228 is because when I was reading it the first time, I got to page 228, saw this phrase again, and then said, oh, where did I see that? And I went back to this page. So you too will get better at seeing phrases repeated. All right. So this part tells about Odysseus's men not really listening to him. He says, then I urged them to cut and run, set sail. But would they listen? Not those mutinous fools. So this is Odysseus's crew. That he, even though he's a leader, he doesn't always have good control over them. He says there was too much wine to swill, too many sheep to slaughter down along the beach, and shambling longhorn cattle. So the men got greedy, basically. And all the while, the Cicones sought out other Cicones, called for help from their neighbors living inland, a larger force and stronger soldiers too, skilled hands at fighting men from chariots, skilled when a crisis broke to fight on foot. Out of the morning mist they came against us, packed as the leaves and spears that flower forth in spring. All right, well, I'm sure you can recognize that as a normal old simile. So underline and write that. And Zeus presented us with disaster, me and my comrades, doomed to suffer blow on mortal blow. So what's happened here is that because the men were greedy and didn't leave when Odysseus wanted to, and they hung around to get more and more stuff, the Cicones gathered their forces and are now fighting back. So lining up, both armies battled it out against our swift ships. Both raked each other with hurtling bronze lances. Long as morning rose and the blessed day grew stronger, we stood and fought them off, massed as they were. But then, when the sun wheeled past the hour for unyoking oxen, the Cicones broke our lines and beat us down at last. Out of each ship, 6 men-at-arms were killed. The rest of us rowed away from certain doom. So Odysseus had 12 ships, and because they hung around too long, 6 guys from each ship were killed, so he lost 72 men on that voyage. So he says, from there we sailed on, glad to escape our death, yet sick at heart for the dear companions we had lost. Okay, so I'm telling you, this is a stock phrase. And so as you're reading, you should be looking for that. If you come across it when you're finishing book 9 on your own, go ahead and underline it as a stock phrase because you've seen it here. Okay, it says, but I would not let our rolling ship set sail until the crews had raised the triple cry, saluting each poor comrade cut down by the fierce Cicones on that plain. Now Zeus, who masses the storm clouds, okay, so epithet describing Zeus, hit the fleet with the north wind. Okay, a howling demonic gale, shrouding over in thunderheads, the earth and sea at once. And night swept down from the sky, and the ships went plunging headlong on, our sails slashed to rags by the hurricane's blast. Okay, so they get caught in a big, huge storm that they think Zeus has caused. We struck them. Cringing at death, we rowed our ships to the nearest shoreline, pulled with all our power. There, for 2 nights, 2 days, we lay by, no let up, eating our hearts out, bent with pain and bone tired. Okay, so when Dawn, with her lovely locks, that's an epithet describing the dawn, personifying dawn, brought on the 3rd day, then stepping the masts and hoisting white sails high, we lounged at the oarlocks, letting wind and helmsmen keep us true on course. And now at long last, I might have reached my native land unscathed, but just as I doubled Malia's cape, a tide rip and the north wind drove me way off course, careening past Cythera. So again, more bad weather. 9 whole days I was borne along by rough, deadly winds on the fish-infested sea. So this is describing the sea, epithet, fish-infested. Then on the 10th, our squadron reached the land of the Lotus Eaters. Okay, so new place. And if you look at your map, if you look from 2 to 3, you will see how far they got blown off course. Basically, they are like at the end of the earth. They were very close, well, pretty close. Ismaris, the Saconis weren't too far from Ithaca, but now they're very far. Okay. Anyway, the Lotus Eaters, they were people who eat the lotus, mellow fruit and flower. We disembarked on the coast, drew water there, and crewmen snatched a meal by the swift ships. Once we'd had our fill of food and drink, I sent a detail ahead, 2 picked men and a third, a runner, to scout out who might live there. Men like us, perhaps, who live on bread? So off they went, and soon enough they mingled among the natives, lotus eaters. Lotus eaters who had no notion of killing my companions, not at all. They simply gave them the lotus to taste instead. Any crewmen who ate the lotus, the honey-sweet fruit, lost all desire to send a message back, much less return. Their only wish to linger there with the lotus eaters, grazing on lotus, all memory of the journey home dissolved forever. So guys, I don't know if you've seen like the Percy Jackson movies or read the book, but the lotus eaters were similar to when he goes into that casino, or when they go into the casino and those people have forgotten that they've been there for like 20 years. So that's what this is. They eat this flower and they just forget about everything, and they never want to leave. They just want to stay there forever, distracted. So you can see up here that says the lotus eaters symbolize distraction. Okay. However, Odysseus, being the good leader he is, if we go to line 110, he says, "But I brought them back to the hollow ships, and streaming tears I forced them, hauled them under the rowing benches, lashed them fast, and shouted out commands to my other steady comrades." So basically, Odysseus did not leave them behind. He picked them up and carried them back to the ship. So I hauled them under the rowing benches, lashed them fast, and shouted out commands to my other steady comrades. "Quick! No time to lose! Embark in the racing ships!" So none could eat the lotus, forget the voyage home. They swung aboard at once, they sat to the oars in ranks, and in rhythm churned the water white with stroke on stroke. From there we sailed on, our spirits now at a low ebb, and reached the land of the high and mighty Cyclops. Okay. So Cyclops, circle that, new character. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Cyclops, that's the creature with the one big eye in the middle of the head. So they've reached the land, or the island, where all these Cyclops live. Okay, lawless brutes. So it's an adjective describing them, so it's an epithet. Who trust so to the everlasting gods, they never plant with their own hands or plow the soil. Unsown, unplowed, so he's describing the Cyclops here. The earth teems with all they need, wheat, barley, and vines, swelled by the rains of Zeus to yield a big, full-bodied wine from clustered grapes. They have no meeting place for council, no laws either. No, up on the mountain peaks they live in arching caverns, each a law to himself. So go ahead and mark that as a metaphor. Ruling his wives and children, not a care in the world for any neighbor. So they're not big on community, the Cyclops. They just all do their own thing. Okay, now a level island stretches flat across the harbor, not close and short to the Cyclops coast, not too far out, thick with woods where the wild goats breed by hundreds. No trampling of men to start them from their lairs, no hunters roughing it out on the woody ridges, stalking quarry, ever raid their haven. No flocks browse, no plowlands roll with wheat, unplowed, unsown forever, empty of humankind. The island just feeds droves of bleeding goats. So I guess I marked this P for personification. I'm sorry if the tapping of this pen is driving you nuts. For the Cyclops have no ships with crimson prows. So, they're stuck on the island. They don't have ships. No shipwrights there to build them good trim craft that could sail them out to foreign ports of call, as most men risk the seas to trade with other men. Such artisans would have made this island, too, a decent place to live in. No mean spot. It could bear you any crop you like in season. The water meadows along the low, foaming shore run soft and moist, and your vines would never flag. The land's clear for plowing. Harvest on harvest, a man could reap a healthy stand of grain. The subsoil's dark and rich. So you'll notice here, I said it describes the Cyclops' living conditions. It's pretty nice. It's a fertile island. Okay. There's a snug deepwater harbor there. What's more, no need for mooring gear, no anchor stones to heave, no cables to make fast. Just beat your keels, ride out the days till your shipmate's spirit stirs for open sea and a fair wind blows. And last, at the harbor's head, there's a spring that rushes fresh from beneath a cave, and black poplars flourish round its mouth. So there's food, it's water. There's water, not a bad place. Here we landed, and surely a god steered us in through the pitch-black night. Not that he ever showed himself, with thick fog swirling around the ships, the moon wrapped in clouds, and not a glimmer stealing through that gloom. So apparently they arrived at night, and so he's saying, luckily, a god must have guided them in because they, didn't hit any rocks or anything like that on their way in, even though they couldn't see. Okay, so he says, not one of us glimpsed the island, scanning hard, or the long combers rolling us slowly toward the coast. Not till our ships had run their keels ashore. Beaching our vessels smoothly, striking sail, the crews swung out on the low shelving sand, and there we fell asleep, awaiting dawn's first light. When young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, underline that, and that is a very popular stock phrase. So every time you see it, underline it and mark it as a stock phrase from now on. We all turned out, intrigued to tour the island. The local nymphs, the daughters of Zeus himself, flushed mountain goats so the crews could make their meal. Quickly we fetched our curved bows and hunting spears from the ships, and, splitting up into 3 bands, we started shooting. And soon enough, some god had sent us bags of game to warm our hearts. A dozen vessels sailed in my command, and to each crew 9 goats were shared out, and mine alone took 10. So remember how I told you he had 12 ships before? This is where that information came from. Okay. Then all day long, till the sun went down, we sat and feasted well, on sides of meat and rounds of heady wine. The good red stock in our vessel's holds had not run out. There was still plenty left. The men had carried off a generous store in jars when we stormed and sacked the Sacones' holy city. So remember, they plundered Ismarus and took a bunch of supplies from them. So they've got a lot on their ship. Now we stared across at the Cyclops shore, so near we could even see their smoke, hear their voices, their bleating sheep and goats. And then, when the sun had set and night came on, we lay down and slept at the water's shelving edge, when young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more. And I think you guys know what to do here, because just a few lines above, you saw this stock phrase, so mark it. I called to muster briskly, commanding all the hands. The rest of you stay here, my friends, in arms. I'll go across with my own ship and crew and probe the natives living over there. What are they? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men? Okay, so the point is that only Odysseus' ship and crew go, so the other 11 stay behind. And you'll notice I wrote over here, why did he go? Basically to get gifts, because remember, hospitality was a huge deal. So when strangers, for the Greeks, so when strangers showed up, they were given gifts and food and wine. So Odysseus is searching for some more gifts. Okay, so with that, I boarded ship and told the crew to embark at once and cast off cables quickly. They swung aboard, they sat to the oars in ranks, and in rhythm churned the water white with stroke on stroke. But as soon as we reached the coast, I mentioned, no long trip, we spied a cavern just at the shore, gaping above the surf, towering, overgrown with laurel. And here big flocks, sheep and goats, were stalled to spend the nights. And around its mouth a yard was walled up with quarried boulders sunk deep in the earth, and enormous pines and oak trees looming darkly. Here was a giant's lair. Okay, so that's going to be the Cyclops, in fact, who always pastured his sheep flocks far afield and never mixed with others. A grim loner, dead set in his own lawless ways. So if you want, you can write down here, this is a description of the Cyclops, underline that this is him. Right, this is the Cyclops. Here was a piece of work by God, a monster built like no mortal who ever supped on bread. No, like a shaggy peak, I'd say, a man-mountain, rearing head and shoulders over the world. Okay, so that like is going to make this a simile. He's like a shaggy peak, just a normal old simile. And he's a man-mountain. It's a metaphor describing the Cyclops. So he's a pretty big fella. All right, I told most of my good trusty crew to wait, to sit tight by the ship and guard her well, while I picked out my dozen finest fighters. So you'll notice that only 12 of them are going. And off I went. But I took a skin of wine along, the ruddy, irresistible wine that Marin gave me once, Euanthes' son. Okay, so we don't really know who these people are, but it is genealogy because it tells who he's related to. A priest of Apollo, lord of Ismarus, because we'd rescued him, his wife and children, reverent as we were. Okay, so they rescued this guy Marin, who was Apollo's priest, and he gave him some wine. He lived, you see, in Apollo's holy grove, and so in return, he gave me splendid gifts. He handed me 7 bars of well-wrought gold, a mixing bowl of solid silver, then this wine. He drew it off in generous wine jars, 12 in all unmixed, and such a bouquet, a drink fit for the gods. Okay, so he's still talking about Marin's wine. So no maid or man of his household knew that secret store, only himself, his loving wife, and a single servant. Whenever they'd drink the deep red mellow vintage, 20 cups of water he'd stir in 1 of wine. And what an aroma wafted from the bowl. What magic, what a godsend. No joy in holding back when that was poured. So it must have been really strong wine if for every cup of wine you mixed it with 20 cups of water. Anyway, filling a great goatskin now, I took this wine, provisions too, in a leather sack. A sudden foreboding told my fighting spirit I'd soon come up against some giant clad in power like armor plate, a savage deaf to justice, blind to law. All right, so a couple things here. You are going to, I'm telling you now, this is going to be a stock phrase that you're going to see later. So mark it as such. When you see some giant clad in power like armor plate, you'll remember that you saw that before and mark it as a stock phrase. Also, we can mark this as foreshadowing. So he's got this sudden foreboding that something bad is going to happen. Okay. Our party quickly made its way to his cave, but we failed to find our host himself inside, so they get to an empty cave. He was off in his pasture, ranging his sleek flocks. So we explored his den, gazing wide-eyed at it all. The large, flat racks loaded with drying cheeses. The folds crowded with young lambs and kids, split into 3 groups. So groups of baby goats and sheep. Here the springborn, here mid-yearlings, here the fresh sucklings off to the side. Each sort was penned apart, and all his vessels, pails, and hammered buckets he used for milking were brimming full with whey. From the start, my comrades pressed me, pleading hard. Let's make away with the cheeses, then come back, hurry. Drive the lambs and kids from the pens to our swift ship. Put out to sea at once. So this is his men's idea. Let's take everything we can get and run and bring it to our ship. However, says, but I would not give way. And how much better it would have been, not till I saw him, saw what gifts he'd give. But he proved no lovely sight to my companions. Okay, so Odysseus refuses. He says, but I would not give way. And how much better it would have been. He says, I wouldn't give way, not till I saw him, saw what gifts he'd give. So you can mark this as Odysseus' flaw of being stubborn here. And, I mean, this is a mistake. They should have left when they could have. And this idea of saw what gifts he'd give, that's the idea of hospitality that I mentioned to you. So write that down. Okay, so there we built a fire, set out our hands on the cheeses, offered some to the gods, and ate the bulk ourselves, and settled down inside, awaiting his return. And back he came from pasture late in the day, herding his flocks home and lugging a huge load of good dry logs to fuel his fire at supper. He flung them down in the cave, a jolting crash. We scuttled in panic into the deepest dark recess. And next, he drove his sleek flocks into the open vault, all he'd milk at least. But he left the males outside, rams and billy goats out in the high-walled yard. Then, to close his door, he hoisted overhead a tremendous, massive slab. No 22 wagons, rugged and four-wheeled, could budge that boulder off the ground, I tell you. Such an immense stone the monster wedged to block his cave. So basically what Odysseus is describing is that there's no real door to the cave. So every night when the Cyclops goes in, he takes a huge boulder and, blocks himself into the cave with that boulder. And it's so big that there's no way anybody could move it. Okay, so here, then down he squatted to milk his sheep and bleating goats, each in order, and put a suckling underneath each dam. Oops, sorry about that. So mark this off as a stock phrase, which you will see later. And half of the fresh white milk he curdled quickly, set it aside in wicker racks to press for cheese. The other half let stand in pails and buckets, ready at hand to wash his supper down. As soon as he'd briskly finished all his chores, he lit his fire and spied us in the blaze, and, strangers, he thundered out, now who are you? Where did you sail from over the running sea lanes? Out on a trading spree or roving the waves like pirates? Okay, so that's just a basic simile. Sea wolves raiding at will who risk their lives to plunder other men? The hearts inside us shook, terrified by his rumbling voice and monstrous hulk. Nevertheless, I found the nerve to answer firmly. Men of Achaia we are, and bound now from Troy. So let me just mention that Achaia is another word for Greece. Driven far off course by the warring winds, over the vast gulf of the sea, battling home on a strange tack, a route that's off the map, and so we've come to you. So it must please King Zeus's plodding heart. We're glad to say we're men of Atrides Agamemnon. You'll see that, guys, here Atrides just means the son of Atreus. So Agamemnon, the Greek commander, was the son of Atreus, is what he's saying. I mean, I guess that would be genealogy, but it's a little confusing, so I won't mark it. Whose fame is the proudest thing on earth these days. Okay, so you will underline that and put theme equals fame. So great a city he sacked. Again, he's talking about Agamemnon sacking Troy. Such multitudes he killed. But since we've chanced on you, we're at your knees in hopes of a warm welcome, even a guest gift. The sort that hosts give strangers. That's the custom. Respect the gods, my friend. We're suppliants, at your mercy. Zeus of the strangers guards all guests and suppliants. Strangers are sacred. Zeus will avenge their rights. All right, so here we have the theme of hospitality. And I don't know if you guys found this in your research, but Zeus was the god of guests. And so that's one of the reasons everybody was so hospitable and kind to strangers and guests, because they didn't want to get Zeus angry. And they knew that if they weren't kind to the strangers, then Zeus, the god of the guests, would get angry. So that's hospitality flourished in Greece for that reason. Okay, so stranger, says the Cyclops. He grumbled back from his brutal heart. You must be a fool, stranger, or come from nowhere, telling me to fear the gods or avoid their wrath. We Cyclops never blink at Zeus and Zeus's shield of storm and thunder, or any other blessed god. We've got more force by far. So unfortunately for Odysseus, the Cyclops doesn't care about the whole custom of hospitality and giving gifts to strangers and guests because he's not afraid of Zeus. Okay, I'd never spare you in fear of Zeus's hatred, you or your comrades here, unless I had the urge. But tell me, where did you moor your sturdy ship when you arrived? Up the coast or close in? I'd just like to know. So he laid his trap, but he never caught me. No, wise to the world, I shot back in my crafty way. My ship, Poseidon, god of the earthquake, smashed my ship. All right, so epithet describing Poseidon. He drove it against the rocks at your island's far cape. He dashed it against a cliff as the winds rode us in. I and the men you see escaped sudden death. Okay, so obviously Odysseus is lying, but he's smart enough not to tell the Cyclops about where his ships are located, because he's sensing this might not go very well. Not a word in reply to that, the ruthless brute. Lurching up, he lunged out with his hands toward my men, and snatching two at once, rapping them on the ground, he knocked them dead like pups. Okay, this is a simile. Their brains gushed out all over, soaked the floor, and ripping them limb from limb to fix his meal, he bolted them down like a mountain lion. Okay, another gross simile. Left no scrap, devoured entrails, flesh and bones, marrow and all. So he eats people, clearly, which is this note over here. But yeah, before Odysseus or anybody knew what was going on, he took the men. I mean, this is such a graphic description. He wrapped them on the ground. So he basically picks them up and like hits them onto the ground, dead like pups, gushing their brains out, soaking the floor. And then he rips them up limb by limb, and bolted them down means that he ate them. So raw, no cooking necessary. Okay, including entrails, which is like their intestines, flesh and bones, marrow and all. All right. We flung our arms to Zeus. We wept and cried aloud, looking on at his grisly work, paralyzed, appalled. But once the Cyclops had stuffed his enormous gut with human flesh, washing it down with raw milk, he slept in his cave, stretched out along his flocks. And I, with my fighting heart, I thought at first... Okay, this is the ... This is where I'm leaving you guys to your own, or on your own. So you will finish book 9. That's pages 221 to 229, I think. So you're going to read, try to understand what's happening, and then also annotate for the things on your style study. So epithets, themes, stock phrases, intervention of the gods, and there is one more. Let me see what it is. My sheet is somewhere around here. That's why you need to keep these handy. Oh, and genealogy. Okay. So keep your 3 sheets out as you're reading. Good luck. Write down any questions you have as you're going in case you don't know what something is. And then I will answer those questions when I see you in our next Google Meet class. Okay, guys, thanks for listening. Sorry it was a long one, and I'll see you soon. Bye.